we set up an organisation called Make War History, legal action against war in Parliament, and tried to get MPs and QCs and others involved in stopping the war via the International Criminal Court, which had just been set up and was effective as from July 2002. We didn't get anywhere with that, and strangely enough, we had 17 top people, MPs, QCs from just about all the main parties, and several independent lawyers. 17 people signed the letter, and it got nowhere, but it got to the British government, and all 15 of those 17 people dropped out of the group within the next month. So we know that there's something happening behind the scenes to ensure that we carried on waging war. So that's where I got involved in saying we've got to do something about this in a different way. I had joined various marching, demonstrations, protests and other things, including the big march in February 2003. But I realized after about a year that marching, demonstrating, protesting, petitioning has absolutely no effect whatsoever on government policy. So we said we've got to do something different. And it became pretty clear that the only thing that was available to us was to stop this thing by taking hard action against the government. Now, one of the key things I discovered in 2002 was that it's a criminal offence to pay tax. So what I'd like to do is very briefly ask you to look at the United Nations Act 1946, which I've given you a copy of, and try to have a look at, in particular, the first 3 lines of the document, section 1, and the first 3 lines of that, because in that there's a very important statement. It says not involving the use of armed force. Now, I need to let you know that when we signed the UN Charter in 1945, we agreed never to threaten or to use force and to settle all our international disputes peacefully. That was agreed by our government on behalf of all the people of this country, now and in the future, until that law is changed. Now, what happens with international laws is that they don't come into effect in any country until they are ratified. And ratification means that you bring it into your domestic criminal law or law of some sort. When that is done, it has been ratified, and every individual now in 195 nations around the world is committed to upholding and enforcing the UN Charter. Now, in the UN Charter, Article 1, Article 2 is, again, it repeats the phrase, we'll never threaten or use force, and we'll settle all disputes peacefully. I wish we did. We never do. We fought 28 illegal wars since 1946, and there's possibly one of the wars we fought was lawful, partly lawful, which was the Falklands War, which was responding to an external attack. But all the other wars we have fought and murdered somewhere between 8 and 9 million people, including 1/3 of them being children. All the other wars have been totally illegal and criminal. And criminal, according to the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, which prosecuted, convicted, punished and hanged Germany's leaders after the Second World War for waging 11 wars of aggression in violation of what was called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the General Treaty for the Renunciation of War in 1928, which we were all signed up to at the time. So these key laws were being broken by the British government, and that's what concerned me. So I realized that what was happening, marching, demonstrating, protesting, and people feeling pretty desperate about what was going on, was having no effect at all on government policy. And so we needed to find a different solution. And that's where I want you to be absolutely clear by the end of this afternoon what the law says, how our government has been breaching it, and what you can do with your taxes, not paying them, so that we stop paying for what's going on. Now, the reason for that is that I looked back in history and found that all the successful revolutions in history have a component of tax rebellion. They start with tax rebellion. If you don't pay the government, then the government can't do anything with it. Can't do anything against you or against anybody else. So it is very important to stop paying for it. Now, this first happened with Magna Carta in 1215. What happened in 1215 was that the barons were asked by the King John at the time to wage war in Aquitaine and provide the troops and the money for the war. And they said, no, not unless you agree to our 63 demands. And it took him 5 days pondering about it, but he realized after 5 days there was no way he was going to be able to fight or do anything without the support of the British people, and in particular the barons at that time. So he agreed and signed the Magna Carta, what later became known as Magna Carta. 63 new laws in a week. So that was a great success. So, keeping this in mind, and some of the other major revolutions, including the English Revolution and the Civil Wars in 1640, started because the king at that time introduced the inland ship tax. So all towns had to pay ship tax to pay for the navy, and they didn't agree with that, and that started the Civil War. Then the French Revolution. Before that was American independence. In 1765, whenever it was, they introduced the stamp tax into America, and the American colonies didn't like that at all. And they said, no, we're not going to pay it. And they gained their independence from Britain because, again, of refusing to pay a tax. Same with the French Revolution. That started because of the bread taxes in Paris were too high, and people couldn't afford to eat. And so the Queen at the time said, oh, well, let them eat cake. Surely that'll do. Now that started the French Revolution. And again, it was refusal to pay the taxes. Same with the Russian Revolution in 1917. The peasants were losing their farms and ability to grow vegetables just to keep themselves alive. And all of that started to say, no, we've got to do something about it. And so it stimulated and supported the Russian Revolution. The next one was the Indian Revolution, or Indian independence. Gandhi and the Salt Tax Rebellion finally got rid of Britain in India. Two cases in this country that are important to keep in mind. One is the Glasgow women's rent strike in 1915. The British government sent all the young men off to fight in the First World War in the trenches, but wasn't paying their wives. They weren't paying the wives any money, and so the wives were getting thrown out of their homes because they couldn't pay the rent. They said 20,000 of them got together, 20,000 of them got together and refused, stopped the evictions that were taking place and refused to pay increased rents. And the result of that was the government changed the law, and the Housing Act came in 1915, and it lasted until Mrs. Thatcher changed it in the mid-1980s. Again, removing the restrictions on rent increases and evictions. And that, of course, led to the poll tax and the poll tax rebellion, and that's the last time where we have had a really successful tax rebellion in this country that has caused the law to change. And it's only when we cause the laws to change and the behavior of the government to stop are we going to be successful. So what I've been trying to do is to say, look, we all know what the problem is. We've got a tyranny, we have been told to do all sorts of things which we don't agree with. We've got to stop it. But at the moment, nobody's actually looking at detailed solutions So today is about what can we do? What are the solutions to our problems right now that are realistic and achievable in this month, in the next 3 months? We can start to do things right now to stop what is going on.